collaborator by CoSpace and Trynkle. Thank you for signing up. And so we'll just go straight to the point. Today we'll be presenting Sustainability and Corporate Social Responsibility by Rish, and he's the founder of Trynkle. He has really many years of experience even in fintech, government, advisory, industries. And throughout his career, he has worked with 6 distinct geographies and managed teams of more than 500 people. And in addition, he counsels multiple fintech startups in Southeast Asia. So we are excited this afternoon. So without further ado, we'll just get the ball rolling. Rish?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's okay. Let me just share my screen with you guys and we can kick off. Hopefully you guys can all see my screen. Interesting topic today. I'm sure you've all heard about corporate social responsibility. I'm sure you've all got your own kind of views on it, and the places where you're working or your own companies have their own views on it. It's a pretty important topic. It's quite ironic that the world has just had the COP 2021, which was obviously the climate change, big climate change summit that all the countries got together to tackle the issues of global warming, etc. And corporate social responsibility kind of fits into that. So if any of you ever saw any of the COP 2021 summit, I know some parts of it's quite boring and it's very political, but you'll see that there was a lot of corporate sponsors attached to the project. And that kind of values and devalues a lot of things. So it gives value to the summit, obviously, because a lot of names attached to it. There's a lot of money going through it. But it also devalues a lot of things because you start to question about whether companies are only associating themselves with corporate social responsibility just to look good, or do they have genuine ethos and morals towards actually having a proper corporate social responsibility strategy. So that's some of the things we're going to talk about today. I think it's going to be really prevalent, especially in the next 5 to 10 years. For those of you who are running businesses, hopefully we can give you some insights into how to develop your own corporate social responsibility strategy, which we're just going to basically call the strategy going forward. And for those of you who are working or employees within organizations, how much do you actually think about your company's strategy and the ethic and ethos towards actually helping others and giving to charity? So those are a few of the touch points. As usual, we'll probably leave the last kind of 20 minutes to questions. Probably going to finish around 12:50. So if anyone's got anything that they want to ask throughout the talk, please just put them in the chat box and we'll get to them later. A bit about me and my interactions with corporate social responsibility. So I'll tell you what, I'll be very frank, until I was probably about 30 years old, I really didn't care that much about corporate social responsibility. And it's not because I'm an evil or kind of hateful person and don't want to help other people. It's just because it doesn't fit into, it didn't fit in to my day-to-day work. I didn't go to my office where I'm, doing projects and managing teams and think to myself, well, am I helping the community? Am I helping bigger causes? Is my company's profit going to the right channels? Blah, blah, blah. And one of the reasons for that is because companies themselves kind of compartmentalized their corporate social responsibility into small boxes and didn't really make it transparent to their own internal employees. I mean, I think they did it externally, but on an internal basis, very limitedly. And it's not the type of water cooler conversation you have where you go in and you say, hi, what's the company doing for the community, or what's the company doing for climate change, etc. And the reason it changed when I was 30 is because I got into the C-level at the bank I was working. And I opened up my financial statements, which I had to sign off on. And I realized that there was this whole big section on corporate social responsibility. So I started reading it and realized that I didn't really have any idea what was going on and what my company was actually contributing to all these different aspects of society and the environment, etc. So I took it upon myself to learn it. And it was kind of illuminating because for that particular employer that I was working for, they actually were contributing a lot to society and they were doing a lot of charitable donations, and their employees did have initiatives that they could go on and align themselves to. I was just not made aware of it. And every time I had to sign off for quarterly financials or yearly financials, I had this big set of pages in front of me. And I decided it was quite important to actually know what was going on within those pages and ensure that, I was also aligned personally to those objectives, and professionally I was driving my staff to do that. So that's just a bit about how I got into it, and I'm going to give you some more examples going forward later. So I think you all know what corporate social responsibility means. It essentially looks at how an organization is impacting its surroundings from both a social and environmental aspect. it's got a lot of bad press in previous years, purely because people aren't really sure whether it's a true drive or a true internal strategy, or they're just doing it as a bit of kind of a kind of window shopping thing where, or just as a kind of fake transparency to actually show people that they care. And the reality is now it's becoming even more paramount, because people are able to decipher, well, is this company actually doing something which is genuine? And is this company actually doing something that's actually helping their surroundings and their clients and their communities, versus the companies that are actually just doing it for kind of face value, right? And I think as the social development within employees and individuals in society is kind of getting bigger, people are talking about more social issues, whether it's sustainability, kind of green ventures, social equality, financial inclusion, all these things. As these things are being talked about more socially within our schools, within our communities, I think corporates are realizing that they need to have an angle, and they need to have a real strong strategy and set of procedures and processes that actually show that they support these initiatives. And companies are really seeing that actually these initiatives can actually help them from a bottom line perspective. If you look at it on a general basis, companies that have strong CSR strategies actually make more profit than companies that don't. Companies that have strong CSR strategies actually have stronger brands, stronger goodwill values than companies that don't. And companies that have strong CSR strategies also tend to get employee happiness tends to be more. Okay, you get employee well-being is higher. The level of satisfaction within working in that environment is higher. So you can see a few of the benefits of having a strong CSR strategy. Now, I think as we move forward, what you're going to actually see is it's not just an internal discussion that needs to happen. You're going to see regulators get involved. You're going to see investors only invest in initiatives where CSR is one of the main drivers of, or one of the predominant goals of progress within that company. And I think people are going to start to attach corporate social responsibility in terms of metrics like profit, in terms of revenue, in terms of employee happiness, all these things that traditionally they didn't do. So the whole data side of CSR is really exploding. And that's one of the things I look at a lot within Trynkle and some of the clients that I have. Can I measure my employee wellness based on the CSR activities that I do within Trynkle? I think I can. Can my clients measure their internal KPIs by the CSR initiatives that they're driving within the organization? And you can see that there are actually some strong correlations, because nowadays, as opposed to 50 years ago, a lot of employees and customers actually care a lot about the place where they're doing business and where they're working. So if you think about it, one of the biggest parts of any corporate website going forward is actually going to be the values part of the website. Discuss the CSR strategy, discusses the company's ethos, things like that. And these are some of the things that I want you to think about. And, just from a sustainability perspective, I think a lot of companies are losing traction because they're not doing enough to show that as a long-term initiative, their company has a sustainable strategy. And CSR is directly linked into that. So think about that. Now, why, I guess, there's a lot of things that have happened in the last 2 years that have kind of accelerated and driven people's kind of understanding of CSR. And specifically, asking certain questions like, is my employer contributing to me and the wider community? Is my employer, does it have values in the way it makes money? Does it have a strong company ethos, right? Is it focused on things like mental health and access to education, things like that? And I think as employees ask more and more of these questions, the onus is on companies to show that they actually have a solution or a strategy or an answer to this. And I think that's really key. So for those of you who are in kind of managerial roles or senior manager roles or building out your own company, always think about the long-term solutions. Like what is it that people can empathize with when doing business with me? What is it that my employees are going to say, well, wow, I love working here, right? And a lot of companies probably take that for granted. They think that just because they're paying a company well, or so they're paying their employees well, that they don't necessarily have to answer the more kind of qualitative questions that employees ask of them. And if you look at a lot of companies, like, I'm wearing an Adidas t-shirt now, if you look at some of my Adidas, they've committed to some really long-term goals that they think their employees can buy into, as well as their customers. They only want to use 100% sustainable cotton. They want to be carbon neutral by 2030, things like that. And a lot of people, before even applying to jobs, are actually looking at the mandates that these companies have from a CSR perspective. And I think that's important for all of us to think about going forward. COVID-19 has brought a new kind of edge to this. People are thinking about, well, has my company thought about the repercussions of COVID-19? Have they looked after their staff? Have they looked after their customers? Things like that. And individuals also want to attach themselves to the idea of social purpose. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see I've written a bit about social purpose there. This idea that whatever you're doing on a day-to-day basis within your organization, whether you're doing accounts or whether you're building shoes or building houses or making shoes, whatever it is there a social purpose behind the activities of your company? Now, very few companies, mainly NGOs or nonprofits, can get away with a complete social purpose. But even if you're a big bank whose primary role is to drive revenues through the roof and make as much money as possible, if you have a social purpose attached to your day-to-day activities, more and more likely you'll attract customers, and more likely you'll actually be in a position to hold on to your staff, and the better staff at that. So think about some of these things. And this is one of the big shifts that we're seeing at the moment, where individuals within the organization are really driving this idea of what should my company be doing from a corporate social responsibility. And this is kind of called corporate citizenship. It's the idea that you as an individual within your company can play a role in impacting the company's greater good and impacting the greater good that company does. So if you look at any kind of big company website, you'll probably see a big part of their website dedicated to values, corporate social responsibility, like I mentioned before. But integral to that is actually seeing the metrics behind that, seeing how much they're contributing, how much they're donating to society, how much they've pledged to their community, how much they're trying to be sustainable in the manufacturing world or the logistics world. So think about those things. And when you're growing your company brand in particular, try to find an angle and try to find an ethos undergoverned by social purpose that can drive your business forward. I think you'll be much more successful. And additionally, from a marketing standpoint, it just makes sense because it's something else to talk about. It's a different identity that you have. So a couple of points on why is it important. Obviously the community impact is important. We've talked in previous talks about from a sustainability point of view about how community growth, reducing the impacts of climate change, having a circular economy are all really important concepts. And that's the idea of kind of growing the community and ensuring that a company is seen as part of the community instead of just impacting the community. I think that's important. And there's always a symbiotic relationship between community and company, whether you're the world's biggest company or you're just a small SME within that geography. If you look at Microsoft, for instance, the impact on the Seattle ecosystem where Microsoft is HQ'd is huge. If you look at the Silicon Valley companies, the amount of work they do in the greater Los Angeles and greater San Francisco and California region is huge, right? So think about your impacts on the community and how your local community values you as a company. I think that's really important. And for employees, think about what you want within your community that maybe your company can help you do. Transparency is a really important thing. I think a lot of people just assume, a company that makes $100 million must be donating to charity or must be doing some kind of social good. But make that transparent, show that within your financial statements, be really articulate about what it is from a social good point of view that you're doing. Organizational purpose is probably the most important thing I think you should take away from this slide. What does that mean? It means that the company as a whole has a direction which they're going with in terms of doing greater social or environmental good, right? And a lot of you have probably worked in companies where you get sent to schools to maybe just do a workshop at a school, or maybe you get to recycle clothes or whatever it is. And those are great activities on a standalone basis, but do they sum up to a strategy? Do they sum up to a purpose? Or is your company just sending you because they have to do that one day a year? And it's always better. It's always much more intoxicating and something to be proud about when there's a greater, bigger governed purpose behind that. And I think that's really important. And one of the things a lot of you should be doing is to say, well, is my organization's purpose actually true, tried and tested, and kind of honorable? You look at a lot of the big companies, Starbucks have got in trouble for this recently. IKEA is another big name that's got in trouble for this, where they seem to be doing a lot of initiatives, but the initiatives are more just kind of marketing exercises more than actual proper strategic initiatives that can bring greater good. So think about the organizational purpose. The other thing I'd definitely say is increase employee morale. If you look at this from a real employee happiness perspective, most people these days, and there was a big survey that came out about 3 weeks ago where they interviewed a lot of Gen Zs and millennials, And 50% of those people said that they want to attach themselves to a company, i.e. work for a company where they have a strong CSR strategy and they're doing a lot of social and environmental good, right? You can see this a lot in companies now because they're hiring people called chief impact officers, right? 20 years ago, this would never have been heard of, you know? We never would have had a chief impact officer, never would have had anything to do with impact. It would have just been a subsection of HR. Now we're hiring genuine people who can go out there and drive CSR strategies, people who can really talk about the company brand and pushing it forward, and people who actually look at things from a microeconomic standpoint of driving community change, understanding the value of the good they're doing. And it's really important point because sometimes companies go through bad years financially, right? They may not have the biggest profits or the biggest revenues, and they can leverage off the improvements in brand equity or the improvements in goodwill to actually make up that difference. And so it's a different kind of balance sheet view that you're having of your organization. My organization isn't just my P&L statement. It's not just about how much profit I'm making. It's also about what's my brand equity, what's my goodwill value. And these things are all incorporated under that, or corporate social responsibility is incorporated under that wider banner, right? So think about it from those perspectives. And hopefully it shows you now a few reasons as to why it's important, okay? I think now when you look at it, right, when you go to a Starbucks or any coffee shop, or you go to buy clothes, you go to Zara, you go to H&M, you know, H&M now recycling, offering the chance to recycle clothes. There's a general mindset within society now where people are thinking more about ethos, and they're thinking more about whether their actions are causing social harm or environmental harm or social good or environmental good, okay? I still don't think it's as big as it should be, right? And some of the dilemmas that the COP 2021 summit showed was that maybe only a subsection of society are really focused on these. But I think it shows that the mentality of the youth in particular is kind of trying to follow these ideas of ideologies and progressive ideologies towards change, whether it's change of the environment, it's change within society, etc. And I think companies are understanding that if they want to hire the best of the best, or they want to hire a good set of employees going forward, they also need to think about the ethos of those people as individuals and try to align themselves, right? So they're looking at how do I have a long-term, strong organization? How do I have a sincere organization? How do I ensure that my resources are managed in the most effective way? And the best way of doing that is actually to look at what are the topical issues within society at the moment. And, you know, some of them are bigger than others. You know, something like climate change is obviously in people's minds at the moment because of what's going on. Sustainability attaches itself to that. But maybe something like, you know, resource allocation isn't up there. Supply chain mechanics isn't up there. So companies are now trying to look at it. This is the primary role of the chief impact officer. This is the primary role of a lot of the HR teams, trying to understand actually, are we making money the right way, as well as how much money are we making, right? And I think that's really interesting because if I had to choose between investing in two companies and both are making $100 million, I'm obviously going to invest in a company that makes the $100 million in the most social and environmentally friendly way as possible, right? And that's really, really important for you guys who are about to start your own businesses as well and your own startups. Think about how you can have an angle where you're thinking about corporate social responsibility and making money the right way. You'll come across as a more sincere organization. You'll come across as an ethical organization. You'll come across as a more responsible organization. And that's exactly what people like these days. A really good example of this from the 1990s was the Body Shop. And the Body Shop's founder pretty much, you know, came to the table saying that she just cares about the environment. You know, that was it. Everything's made environmentally friendly. There was a social impact with every purchase that happens from the Body Shop. And I love that about it because it also made people think in a different way. Their consumer experience wasn't just about what can I get for the cheapest value. It's, well, what am I getting? How much did it cost? Where did it come from? And does it actually give back to any of the areas where my own personal ethics and personal morals attach themselves to? So that's really, really important. So, you know, people always ask me, you know what, Rich, when you were a CFO or when you were managing teams, you know, how did you actually manage corporate social responsibility? So the easiest answer to this is I used to send my team on volunteer days. And, we used to do some charity work. We used to go to schools, things like that. But that's a really micro level activity, right? At a macro level, what did we do? Did we give huge donations? Did we actually, reinvest some of our revenue in developing projects? Well, we did all of those. But I think companies are really struggling at the moment to kind of sync up how much of their money they should give to others and where to give it. And one of the best examples of a company that actually really helps this process is Global Giving, right? So this slide is pretty much dedicated to them. Global Giving is essentially acts as an intermediary of where your money should go and where your money would be best utilized, right? They do a lot of fundraising around kind of natural disasters, poverty, food deprivation, those type of societies. But one of the essence behind Global Giving is the fact that they found a way of trying to really understand at a grassroots level where money needs to go. And this is really important because at a managerial level, at a C-suite level, it's very easy to just say we're giving to charity. But what happens if you give to a charity that 5 years later is found to be fraudulent, or 10 years later is found to be that, well, not all the money went there, or that, actually the money didn't go there, it went somewhere else. So the idea of you just giving, just really being altruistic and just giving to people is great, but it also needs to be aligned to more global and more community level understanding of where your money is actually going, and is it actually contributing? Is it going to religious initiatives? That could be quite tricky if you're trying to build a global brand that doesn't have any religious views. Is it going to a girls only charities, which is also very, very valid, but does it actually alienate some of your clientele if most of your clientele are men, let's say? So the idea of actually aligning your goals and your morals to charities that actually need it and will actually utilize the money in the most effective way is really important. And Global Giving does that. And there's some really good examples about some of the funds. They've done the coronavirus relief fund campaign, which was huge. And they've helped raise nearly $500 million over pretty much every country in the world. And they are actually taking a role of actually going into corporates now and saying, hey guys, we know you don't have the time to dedicate to tell us where all your money needs to go or what your charitable initiative should be. So maybe give it to us and help us go through that situation. So that could be an easy way for a lot of you running your own businesses to align yourselves with someone like Global Giving, who don't have any kind of minimum donation criteria, and say, hey guys, we don't really know where's best to spend our money, but we know you guys know, so go about doing it. So that's just a bit of idea about what they're doing. Some more examples. I used Apple because Apple, obviously everyone knows who Apple is, biggest company in the world. Apple's always in a tricky position because they're so big, the valuation of their company is so huge, but they're always getting, with that comes, it's that idea of, with great power comes great responsibility. People are always challenging them. Are you doing enough? Have you solved your problem in China, where all the goods are being made in China for kind of slave labor fees, things like that? Are you giving enough to racial equity? Are you giving enough to gender equality? Things like that. And they're in a really tough position. So what Apple have done recently, they've just donated essentially 100 million to a racial equity and justice initiative. And they've gone a step further by actually organizing their structure, their internal policies and their hiring policies to ensure that they are optimizing equal opportunity hiring in their workforce, right? So that's an example of how Apple are doing it. GM are doing it by saying they're going to be carbon neutral by 2040, and Target have their own plans. But every company doesn't have to be the same. Every company can do it in their own way. Every company can pretty much decide, how much they want to spend, over how many years, things like that. But the key thing to me is make sure that whatever your CSR strategy is, it also ties into your ethos, your goals, your values, things like that. Because those are not year-by-year initiatives. Those are 5-year, 10-year, lifetime initiatives, and you're going to have to live and die by them. So how do you go about actually building your checklist? How do you ensure that you are actually being, responsible from both a social and environmental perspective? I think you need to ask your teams, right? You need to talk within your teams, within your communities, within your management teams, within your, at the water cooler at lunch. You need to have those discussions, because managers are very good at managing the day-to-day workings of the companies. That's why they're managers. The C-suite are great at driving strategy and ensuring the company is making the most amount of money. But actually, as you filter down the organization, whether it's the most junior person in the organization or the most senior person in the organization, you have different views and different ethics and morals that can be added to your CSR checklist. So for instance, at a very senior level, the target may be, just donate 20 million to charity. But at the most junior level, it could be, donate $20 or 20 Singapore dollars or 70 US dollars to the local school. And so there's always going to be a disparity in outlook in that helicopter vision. Managers always see things like that, pretty senior helicopter vision. And it's actually at a junior level, and that's why HR plays an important role in CSR, where the juniors can actually be corporate citizens and give more ideas about how that strategy can be fleshed out. I think it's important to have a volunteer system. So, not just from the point of view of helping others, but also helping internally, getting people outside the office, getting people doing things that shows that the company actually cares about people. And the volunteer system is really, really integral to that. I think not enough companies push volunteer systems and show the actual impact of their volunteer systems enough. You see a lot of the big four do this. They make people go to, schools or prisons or whatever for a day and do some charitable things. But what was the impact of that? It's not just some photos that can be put on the corporate website. You've probably changed someone's life. And that's what they need to illustrate. And volunteer systems are really good for that, showing impact. Invite guest speakers. I speak on CSR a lot with companies, predominantly just trying to highlight that whatever they think they're doing probably isn't enough, and to highlight the role it plays within that balance sheet. As I mentioned, it's definitely an asset that should be pushed forward that isn't. The top right corner is a really interesting point. Don't make much ado about nothing, right? So this is this idea of kind of just being kind of laissez-faire and naive about things, right? It's easy to just say, well, we will do the bare minimum. Or it's easy to say that, well, we're donating, that's enough. But is that enough? Can we do more? In the idea of a hybrid world where people are at home more, you need to think a bit more ingenuity. There needs to be a bit more ingenuity and inventiveness and imagination with regards to CSR. Maybe it doesn't have to be at an organizational level. Maybe it can be at micro levels and add up into the organization. Social media is huge for this. Maybe attaching yourselves to social media initiatives is huge, as long as the company accepts it and the company is willing to go that far, right? Employee wellness skills, another huge one. Corporate social responsibility starts in-house. It starts at home. If you're doing the most amount of charitable work for your community and for the greater society, but all your company is burnt out and all your company is essentially undergoing some level of mental distress, what was the point, right? You're trying to build a sustainable company that could have a sustainable CSR strategy, right? Create additional channels to communicate, I think, is a great one. Like I said, utilize social media, utilize other types of community-based systems like Slack, etc., in your organization to let people have open, transparent discussions about this. And don't judge them based on the discussions they're having. For 10 people, racial equality may be a big driver for their CSR voices and initiatives. For another 10 people, it could be gender equality. For another 20 people, it could just be the local community and the supply chain, right? So allow that open discussion, and it's management or that chief impact officer's job to really decide which way and which angle the company is really going to push. And I think the internet is really good for this, because the internet allows you to actually copy a lot of existing CSR strategies from across the globe, right? And global strategies are actually a big thing these days. Just because you have an obligation to your local community or you're based within a specific city or specific country doesn't mean that you can't have a CSR strategy that impacts other people in other jurisdictions. For instance, one of the things we do at Trynkle is the replanting of trees in certain geographies in the world. So X percentage of whatever our clients gives us goes to Save a Tree initiative, and that's something that's important to us because it gives us more of a global footprint, because there's deforestation across the entire globe, but it also allows us to see a tangible result of the money that we're committing. It's not just a number that goes into the ethos and so it goes into the ether and we don't know where it's gone. It's a physical tree that we can see, view, and put our name attached to it, right? So it's important for us. Now, the final part that I wanted to touch on is kind of linked to a few of the other sections, right? And it's something that came up a couple of decades ago in its infancy, where the United Nations started talking about sustainable development goals, right? And this is really important because you need, despite whatever your views on the United Nations, you do need an organization driving things like sustainability, driving things like equality, driving things like, community building, things like that. So the United Nations got together and built these 17 sustainable goals. Now, if you just go through them, I can guarantee not one organization in the world is tackling all 17 goals, and not one organization has to tackle all 17 goals. But the reason this slide is quite impressive to me is because it shows the nature of the problems out there. So for the last few weeks, we've been talking about circular economy, sustainabilities, going green, food, new waves of food coming our way and things like that. These goals cover all those aspects. So let's just take one, for example, number 4, quality education. I haven't come across that many tier 1 companies, and by tier 1, I mean companies probably earning over 100 million revenue a year who actually have quality education as one of their development goals, okay? They probably do more on the hunger side. They probably do more on the responsible consumption side, but they're probably ignoring quality education. That's probably because maybe a lot of people, especially in more of the first world countries of the world, don't think of education quality as bad enough that they need to act on it. So the UN has come in and said, well, these aren't just goals across 1 or 2 countries, these are goals across the entire globe. Another good example is, life below water. How much are we caring about plastics in our ocean? How much are we caring about biodiversity within our oceans? Things like that. And nowadays, companies are looking at different angles to exploit their CSR budget and exploit how they can push their charitable donations in different directions. And the United Nations have come up with this formula that actually helps people align themselves to certain goals. And one of the things in the startup community that I think is really important is a lot of startups now, instead of waiting for year 1 or year 2 or year 3 before having a CSR strategy, they're aligning themselves to these development goals very, very early in the development of the product or development of their team, okay? So if you're in fintech, for instance, naturally, maybe it's not easy to align yourself to no hunger, but it's definitely easy to align yourself to innovation and infrastructure. It's definitely easy to align yourself to jobs and economic growth. It's definitely easy to align yourself to, partnerships for the goal, right? So when you're building out your company, when you're thinking about, developing your company's Facebook page, etc., think about which of these goals you can align yourself to quicker and actually make some kind of tangible returns within, right? And I think that's really important. If you want to be a gender equal company, which all of us should want to be, then are you taking the right steps for that? Okay. So is equality of opportunity there? Is your hiring policy orientated in a way that both men and women can apply for that one job? If you're proposing to, have renewable energy as one of your goals, is your office location promoting that ideal? Is it promoting that goal? And the best way to do this is to really understand where your personal ethos as a founder comes in versus some of the sustainable goals that the US have kind of helped us develop, right? So just a few words, about developing yourself as a kind of CSR individual, if you like. Think about, if you're a sole entrepreneur, think about what it is you want to achieve. You don't necessarily have to have a CSR strategy. It doesn't mean you won't make money. It doesn't mean you won't be a very, very successful company, but it just reduces your chances of having strong branding and having a strong reputational branding that I think is going to be important for long-term success. I think you can get away with it for 1 or 2 years, but in the long term, a lot of people are going to come your way and say, well, where did that product come from? How come you guys aren't doing anything for your environment? How come you guys are exploiting the communities that are providing you with the product, right? So from an individual perspective, think that if you guys are working within bigger organizations or SMEs, maybe start asking yourself, what is my organizational purpose? What is it that the company is doing for the greater community? What is it doing for internally from a mental health standpoint? What is it doing in terms of social impact? Do the ideals of my management fit in with my personal ideals? Maybe your management don't care about climate change, but you're a really big climate change advocate. That's a good example. Do you want to be working within a company to do that? And then the third part of this is for those of you looking for jobs. Remember, looking for a job isn't a one-way process. It isn't you chucking out your CV saying, well, you know what, I really need a job. I need some money out there. I need to get some money in. I'll take anything. It's a two-way process. You have to be able to sit yourself in a position and say, well, look, I empathize with this company. I like what they're doing. I like how they make money. I think I can make them more money, and it really fits in with my own morals and ethics. And these are some of the questions that I start to ask people who I'm interviewing. It's like, well, okay, well, why do you want to work for Trynkle? Oh, Trynkle will be a really good company to work for. They'll help me grow, and we've got a really good reputation. Okay, so what about my reputation? What about the reputation about what we're doing? Is it really as good as we say on our website? Is it something that you can add value to? Are there ways that you can challenge us to do more things? And I think from a job perspective, I think that's really important. And we see this within the age groups of kind of 18 to 30 now. There's a huge, big amount of social vocalization going on, where people are talking about racial inequality, people are talking about, sexism, people are talking about climate change, people are talking about all these very topical issues at the moment. And companies have an obligation to make sure that they have at least a view and a strategy towards tackling some of these issues. Like I said, it's not possible to do all of them at once, but it's definitely possible to do one or two. So think about how you align yourselves with your future goals, and really remember that corporate social responsibility isn't just a good, nice to have. It's not a value add as it was maybe 10 years ago, where someone just said, look, we need to put this on the balance sheet, so we need to flesh some details out, blah, 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 blah. It needs to be tangible. It can make or break a company. And if companies are not living by their social responsibility strategy and actually doing things untoward and maybe doing things that they say they're not doing, it could have a huge negative impact going forward. And you see this, whether it's, back in the day, one of the big problems was kind of cruelty to animals for cosmetic firms. A lot of brands used to say, oh, we don't test our products on animals. And then lo and behold, a research article comes out 2 years later, and you've tested it on some rats or some mice or whatever, and the company's brand image just kind of goes down the toilet. IKEA have kind of gone through this multiple times over the last 3 years, where they've said, their products come from certain supply chains, and then lo and behold, some research comes about, and they realize that actually, the products didn't come from there. So ensuring that you're living up to what you're saying is really, really crucial, and ensuring that you really understand the ecosystem with which you're operating is really, really crucial. Now, I still think corporate social responsibility it's not 50% of your mental capacity type thing. You don't need to sit down at your table and worry about it that amount of time. But even donating 1% of your mental capacity to it, and the rest of your colleagues doing that, it adds up. And reach out to your chief impact officer. Maybe even ask your managers, do we have a chief impact officer? Maybe reach out to your direct manager and start saying, well, look, I think we should be doing this. There's some initiatives that I really feel good about. Do you mind if I dedicate some of my work hours to this? It's a really important conversation to have. And it's going to just take off and take off and take off and take off and take off even more in the next 5 to 10 years, as the development of the balance sheet becomes even more and more paramount to, the actual progress and reputation of the company. So those are just some kind of ideas to leave you with. I'm going to take some questions soon. Before I do that, I just wanted to tell you guys a bit about what's coming up. So in 2 weeks' time, we've got a session on critical thinking. I think it's one of the most in-demand sessions that we have. This essentially is going to talk a lot about problem solving and how your brain connects certain things. Like, why do you think the way that you think? And how can you optimize that process to ensure that you're not wasting mental capacity and you're actually thinking about things in the right way? We have a great topic on the 13th. This is one of my personal favorites, about what society will be like in 2030, so in about a decade's time. Is it going to be completely different to what we have now? Are we going to be living in some kind of virtual reality kind of craziness? We're going to be talking a bit about Facebook and Meta. So for those of you who are interested in that, do that. And the last topic we have of the year is on emerging business trends. So there's definitely a lot that CoSpace and Trynkle are doing. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions on any of those topics, and do join us for those sessions. So on that note, I'm just going to take some questions. Just bear with me. Okay, some questions from the Australian startup community. How much time did you spend? Thank you for joining us again, by the way. How much time did you spend looking into CSR as a C-suite executive? The honest answer is really not enough time. The problem with CSR is unless you link it to your direct KPIs, you're not going to care about it. That's just the way it works. So for instance, I used to walk into my office on January 1st of every year. My boss tells me, well, Rish, by the end of the year, you need to achieve X revenue, Y profit, Z headcount, and a few other things. And that's it. My mind is completely focused on that. Okay. And I know that come 31st December of that same year, if I've achieved those, I'll probably get a big bonus and I'll be happy and I'll go home. So what do you do? How do you recalibrate that equation? You start to incorporate CSR as a KPI. Okay. It's difficult to do because what you're saying is I need to take time from all those other objectives and allocate a bit of time to something that maybe doesn't matter to you that much, to be perfectly honest, and two, doesn't necessarily contribute to something from a profit standpoint, okay? So that rebalancing and recalibration is really, really important because you need to understand that actually CSR does contribute to your bottom line. It may not contribute to your bottom line in year one, but it will definitely contribute long-term because people will start to view CSR as a major component of your balance sheet, one, and they'll start to actually understand that the brand image and goodwill attached to the company is just as important as the revenue that the company makes. So if you think about it, Facebook, huge company, absolutely huge company, Meta now, absolutely massive company, makes ridiculous amounts of money on the marketing side, basically from their ads, but somehow can't lose this tag of being an irresponsible company. Can't lose this kind of reputation of, kind of controlling people's minds, for want of a better phrase, right? You look at the way Zuckerberg and his management team talk about things, they talk about things in such a very linear, one-dimensional way that they're trying to actually just prescribe people how to do things with the way they post news, with the way they post ads. It's a very confined environment. And over the last decade, Facebook's reputational risk has been huge, despite the fact it's been making bucket loads of money. And that's why Meta actually happened. This is one of the, I won't go into it now because it's for a future session, but Meta is actually just a marketing thing. It's a change of name just to detach themselves from the reputational risk of the name Facebook. And if you look at the press around Facebook and Meta, it's pretty much negative on a day-to-day basis. It's very rare that you have positive news. And if I asked any of you, well, what are Facebook's or Meta's CSR policies or strategies, I personally don't know. I'm pretty sure most of you won't know. And the reason is it gets diluted with the bad news. So having a CSR strategy as a C-suite executive was important for me to ensure that people actually had a strong idea of the reputation that we were trying to build, and we had a good reputation out there, okay? And as I moved through the jobs, and especially as I started working more with my chief human resources officer, and we didn't have a chief impact officer in my last corporate role, but with the chief human resource officer, it was just brilliant. Just having those dialects between two C-suite people, trying to drive a strategy that empowers the organization and the staff, as well as helping the community, was fantastic. And so it's just about trickling to make sure that it's one of your KPIs. Second question we have is, do you think some corporates are using CSR to the company's advantage in building a brand for themselves? Is this ethical? Okay, so I think the definite answer to this is yes. I think a lot of people just have corporate social responsibilities purely as a marketing ploy. So it's branding, right? So it's, I'm carbon neutral. We think about our community supply chain. We are a green company. We just label ourselves as a green company. And then when you drill down into the details, you actually realize that actually, well, are you carbon neutral? Are you really a green company? And some of the SMEs can get away with it because people don't necessarily care that much at that level. But the bigger a company becomes and the more its user base becomes, the higher its user base grows, there's going to be a bit of challenge about how diligent and how honorable your CSR strategy is. Is it ethical? Look, there's a saying that I learned a long time ago, which is business is business. And, I've seen this so many times where people are willing to do anything they want to get as many goods sold or as many customers as possible. But eventually that catches up with you. And, think about this from a human moral perspective. On a day-to-day life with your families and your friends, etc., you want to live as optimal and as moral and ethical a life as you can possibly lead, right? So why doesn't that organically translate into, say, your business? So I think corporates need to distinguish themselves as just being kind of CSR for marketing purposes, as well as the CSR from a actual adding value perspective. And I think the biggest problem at the moment is a lot of companies don't really understand. They don't do the research. They don't do the data analysis. They don't do the real governance work to actually see the net impact of the work that they're doing, right? So, if you're just giving 20 million to charity, for instance, that's just not enough. You need to understand, well, what has that 20 million got for that charity? Where has it gone? Can I give 20 million next year? Or does it have to be 30 million? Would it be 50 million with inflation? Things like that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And once you have that in place, I think it becomes less of a marketing initiative and definitely more of a valuable initiative. I think the other thing to mention at this point is, one of the things I learned when I was kind of doing Trynkle's corporate social responsibility strategy was ensuring you're not trying too hard. Okay, I say this in the best possible way, in the nicest possible way, but don't seem like you're trying to have a very aggressive corporate social responsibility. It should be organic. It should be natural. Okay, it should just stem from day-to-day activities. And I think one of the things that could help companies is in building CSR initiatives or CSR activities within their day-to-day work. So maybe at lunch, everyone drops 10 cents into a piggy bank, or maybe they drop their old clothes into a bucket. It becomes an organic activity. It doesn't necessarily need to be forced. It doesn't need to be, oh, I have to do this because my company told me to. I have to do this because we need to look good this year. I have to do this because if I don't volunteer by the end of the year, I won't get my bonus, whatever. Make sure it's organic, make sure it's natural. Question from Dean. Thanks, Dean. Where have you stood in your CSR experience in supporting individual organizations versus supporting a sector? It's a good question. I think a lot depends on the size of the organization. Okay, so when I was working for companies with multi-billion-dollar balance sheets, it was natural for us to say we needed a industry-wide or a sector-wide impact. Okay, so our CSR strategy was diverse enough to attack multiple organizations within the sector or the sector as a whole. And this is where something like the UN comes in, because you can actually say at a UN level, well, we're going to help them build out their sustainable development goals, or we're going to go to someone like Global Giving who do that hard work for us, essentially, right? I think individual organizations, it becomes tricky because, and I'll give you an example. If I say, as Trynkle, if I had $1 billion in the bank and I said I wanted to give, 10 million of that or 100 million of that to, say, Facebook, because I wanted Facebook to promote greater transparency or individual diversity. Well, I'm then aligning my company's CSR strategy with the internal workings of Facebook. And that can be tricky, okay? Unless you have 100% confidence in that individual organization driving their ethos and driving their moral obligations through to conclusion, it could be very tricky because managers can change. And that particular individual organization may change its strategy. Now I've attached myself to a company whose managers have changed. They have a completely different view as opposed to the time, compared to the time when I invested or donated the money. What do I do now? Do I pull out? Do I not pull out? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's easier in that respect to say, look, I'm going to just look at it from a sector point of view. And I think this goes back to my initial point, which is don't see it as a one-off donation. See it as a timeline. See it as a 5-year, 6-year roadmap of giving to a community. Because if you see it as one-off donations, which in essence, for the majority of them are not going to end up bad, it's not going to end up in any kind of troublesome lawsuit or something like that. But it's very hard for you to see what you're getting. So what are we reaping? What's the rewards that we're reaping from that one-off donation? But if you look at it from a strategic perspective, and it doesn't always have to be money, it could be experience, it could be volunteering, it could be books, it could be whatever, right? See it from an elongated point of view and a long-term point of view more than just a one-off activity. And I think that's integral. And to be honest, look, when I look at Trynkle, and obviously being CEO of Trynkle, I define a lot of how the company does business. So my personal ethics and morals are very much embedded within Trynkle's ethics and morals and our corporate strategy. So I have specific views on specific individual organizations. For instance, I'm very happy with how Adidas do their corporate social responsibility strategy, but I'm not so happy about, say, Nike or Apple, right? And do I align my personal ethics to my company's ethics? Well, that depends on the size of the company. It also depends on the governance of the company. Shouldn't be a one man or one woman show. It should definitely be open up to interpretation and multiple inputs. So think about some of those points of view when you're kind of developing your strategy. No more questions on the chat. Thank you. I would like to thank everyone for coming. Look, there's a lot of additional slides and addendum slides which we have with regards to CSR. So please connect with us if you would like access to those slides. As I